Let's say good morning, good night to our guest. Haven't seen in person in a long, long time. Mr. Robert LeHunte, how you doing?
Hello, good morning, Paul, good morning, Steve, good morning, Richard, good morning, Wendell, good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Akwaba.
Yes, it has been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yes, Wendell, Akwaba.
Yes,
Good
nice
morning,
to see
Mr.
you.
Hunt. I want your red t-shirt for them this morning.
Yeah, boy.
Well, boy, you know what they say about red. If you're not red, you're dead, right? Okay.
No comment.
Talking about the women or... sorry, no, let me not say that.
No.
Red is a
Good morning,
fantastic.
Mr. LeHunte.
Red
Thank
is
you
a
for joining us.
fantastic color, especially as we are about to enter our pre-Republic Day. Tomorrow is a big day for Trinidad and Tobago. It's a day that we grew up as a country when we became a republic. So I think wearing red is indeed very fitting,
Very appropriate.
very appropriate.
You make Wendell smile there, boy.
And from the time the camera came on, he came on and said, hey, he's ready about that.
Well, Mr. LeHunte, good morning. For those of you who may not know, Mr. LeHunte is the immediate past executive director of the IDB and the past Minister of Public Utilities. Thank you for joining us this morning. We want to talk a bit about Trinidad and Tobago, and you had the unique vantage point for 2 years as the executive director of the IDB, which is a significant institution in the region. And a lot of the focus has been placed on climate change. If we could start by giving us a sense of what your tour at the IDB entails, so we get a sense of what you did there as the executive director.
Well, basically, as the executive director, the IDB operates from two perspectives. They operate at the country level, on the ground, and you have at the country level the IDB office, which is right around the savannah, around the and they are staffed by IDB staff personnel who sees about the operations of each individual country. In addition, the region has one position as an executive director, and we sit at the board level, not like the board level of a bank, but actually working in the bank. We sit in Washington, 14 of us, and we are the ones that approve all the loan facilities. We are the ones that conduct and manage the operations of the institution. So like a board of directors, anything that requires human resource management, operational risk, credit risk, etc., comes up to the board and is approved by the management. As a result of that, the Caribbean, as I said, has one position. That position is agreed upon by all the governors of the region, and the countries that were represented in the Caribbean are basically Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Bahamas, Guyana, and the
So who would make up the other 13 members, Mr. LeHunte?
Well, the other 13 members are made up of borrowing member countries and non-borrowing member countries. And they are all put in groups similar to ours. I mean, of course, the Caribbean is put in one particular group. There are people from, Central America. There's a Central American group. There is there are Latin American groups made up of people like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico are the major players. And they are on the borrowing member side. And then you have the non-borrowing member side, which is really a lot of the European countries and all the countries around the world. Japan, China, they are all non-borrowing member countries, and they are also represented also on the board of directors. So you have a board of directors and you have about 46 councillors, who also represent every member country, both borrowing and non-borrowing. So it's a very complicated and intimidating institution that you have to help to navigate. And your major role as the executive director is to seek the interests of the Caribbean region, ensure that the Caribbean region is getting its fair share as it relates to grant funding, non-interest bearing loans, ensuring that we're getting money allocated to us, ensuring that loans that come up from our region are also funded, so that there's a lot of, I suppose, lobbying and discussions among the directors. So when a loan comes before, are there any issues that directors have on the particular loan or on the country, we discuss them among ourselves, and then it goes to credit committee.
Okay.
So that's basically the function, to represent.
Now Trinidad and
the
Tobago has been a
entire region.
beneficiary to not only loan provisions, but part of what the country that receives these loans and the development-based loans, right? Correct?
Yes, they are.
In several areas, and in some instances, quite sizable loans for development projects. In addition to the funding, because of how the IDB operates, from my understanding, from colleagues and friends who associate with the IDB, the country gets a lot of capacity building capability and implementation capability and risk management capability, because a lot of the gaps in particularly Caribbean countries, the IDB helps to move those issues along. Trinidad and Tobago has a serious, in my opinion, implementation gap or deficit. How much do you think Trinidad and Tobago has gained? Because we have a lot of projects, no matter who is in power, announced in Trinidad and Tobago, we get IDB loans, and sometimes those projects happen efficiently and sometimes they don't. Do you think that knowledge transfer, that risk management, that capacity building is happening at the level that it should be, particularly related to Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, as you said, the IDB has assisted. IDB sees itself not only as an institution that provides money, it is actually looked at as a knowledge bank. So that's an institution, when you want to get something done, there are lots of consultants and there are lots of people that you could turn to who have done a lot of this type of work throughout the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, and therefore you could turn to them for assistance. So, for example, one of the key loans that we have gotten in Trinidad is the water sector loan. So this is an example of the work that we would have done over the years, and we got approved for the country. And in doing that loan, the IDB and a number of consultants you will tap in to come in and evaluate the problem. And the IDB will fund the loan when they feel that there's a viable solution. But you're right, in the region, we have identified that there's an execution capacity, an execution shortfall capacity. And therefore, a lot of work is done in assisting these regions in building capacity. So in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, you will get loans. I mean, you have knowledge gaps is will be one particular area. Bureaucracy in the public service is another. Lack of digitization in the public service is another. Some of these things are being addressed, but in a lot of areas, not having appropriate staff or qualified people to be able to effectively execute the loan itself is another shortfall. So these are some of the headings where you will find gaps where, even if you get the money that you get for the region, the ability to spend the money is not always there, and one needs to spend some time in building that capacity building in the region, and that is definitely one of the shortfalls, because at the end of the day,
what does that mean? Inability to spend the money. What does that mean?
Well, when you get a loan, right, there are normally certain conditionalities that you need to fulfill. You just do not get money. It's like simplify it, you go to a bank where you're building a house. You do not get $200,000 or $500,000 just to build the house. The bank wouldn't just put the money in your account and say, write a check. All right, whenever you like, you need to provide the bank with certain documentation to ensure that you are spending the money. You need to build, you need a builder's estimate, you need quantity surveyors reports, etc., etc. So similarly, if you're doing a development loan, all right, you are looking at flooding in Port of Spain, or you are fixing the water sector, all right? In Trinidad and Tobago, for example, we will ensure from the IDB that before you give out contracts, you had proper tendering procedures for these contracts. You ensure that you allowed for access to all members of the country. You ensured, for example, in the water sector loan, you have to hold consultations with members of the community to ensure that they are aware of what you are doing. So these are just examples. And then when you do these things, you are able to access the drawdowns. Now, if you are not able, so if you have a loan approved and you are not doing the things that are required, or your procurement processes are not up to date, etc., you will not be able to access the money as easily as you would like to. So those are some of the requirements that will be needed before you get the money. IDB is very particular. We do not just give the money to the country or give it to the Minister of Finance. We give the money to the particular project and ensure that the project is executed in a manner that meets international standards.
But Mr. LeHunte, outside of the water loan that we would have accessed, could you give an example of anything else Trinidad and Tobago would have benefited from the IDB?
Well, right now, I mean, Trinidad and Tobago, the whole ministry, for example, Ministry of Digitization, was basically set up utilizing resources from the IDB. When the ministry was set up, it was a new ministry, it's a new ministry to this particular region. And for a long while, just setting up the ministry itself, that was done with grant funding from the IDB. Money given to help ensure that they get the required staff, the structure is being utilized, is fit for purpose, etc. And additionally, a power loan, I think it was a close to $100 million. We continue to provide the IDB with that type of expertise in the ministry. And also, I think we are funding a big part of the digitization of Trinidad and Tobago initiative. So that's another loan. We were working on an educational.
Is the IDB satisfied? Loan. Is the IDB satisfied thus far with the progress that that particular digitization loan has resulted?
Well, that particular, one thing I've learned, I mean, prior to when I left the bank, I also went to Answer Bank to set up a digital bank. And, one of the things that I've learned there is that a lot of work is done in the background, lots of work. And if you don't do the work in the background, before you move to the foreground to get it out there, you will not be able to achieve the maximum benefit. And therefore, a lot of work I know is being done, or at least in setting up the infrastructure and the necessary pre-work in digitization. So up to when I left, I mean, we were fairly comfortable. We were not funding all the projects of digitization. We were funding certain aspects. And yes, we were satisfied that enough brain power, enough analysis was being done. I think what you will be seeing very soon, I know there are a number of projects that the minister was working on, and those projects are expected to come to fruition very soon.
What about what, sir?
Very soon is a very vague term in a Trinidad and Tobago context. Very soon could be a decade. And from historical, our history in terms of how we implement projects. And I know one of the projects connected to IDB was the ARIMA Smart City project, which is part of that digitization thrust, which, well, God knows where it is at this point, because there's very little public relations about the project and what the value the project brings to the community, even though I know ARIMA is supposed to be the guinea pig, so to speak, in terms of the rollout of the smart city concept in a Trinidad and Tobago context. And IDB is funding that. So, I mean, it's all And that launch, I think, was sometime in 2022. I was just looking at the online thing 900 and something days ago when Karina Coburn spoke about it. And here we are in 2024, and well, there is no smart city yet.
Well, again, Richard, and hi, good morning again. You know, our at the IDB we provide the funding. We provide the funding on that particular project, for example, to set up a smart city requires project design. You got to design that project in a manner. You have to go out for bids for the infrastructure to make sure that you are buying the right products to do what it is. You got to design and ensure that what exactly are you talking about a smart city that is expandable, that is going to be able to add on, that is going to fulfill the needs of the community for years to come. So 2 years, again, it's sometimes in getting things right, it requires that you do the work on the ground properly. So I know that project is advancing. I mean, of course, at the level at which I operated it, that is really up to the minister, the MPs, and the people who are actually executing the project. I can't go into any detail, but I know that was not a project that we particularly had any problems with, and the work was progressing. And as I said, I'm sure. As for the PR associated with it, that is totally outside of my forte. Again, you asked about WASA. I mean, in the case of WASA, you know, a lot of pre-work. This loan was is 82 million out of a bigger loan of 315 million. And that loan was very close to my heart, and ensuring that we get that loan approved. Again, you know, you cannot fix WASA. I've always said WASA is not a silver bullet fix. WASA requires designated funding so that you will be able to do a number of things. You cannot just depend on getting money every year from the budget allocation. Because as you fix one pipe, you need a pressure management system, you need leak management, you need demand management, etc. So you are seeing a lot of things happening. You need to drill new wells, you need to build infrastructure, you need to fix currently water distribution system. And you are seeing a number of those things are happening. And I think in the case of WASA, we did put out and have some money for WASA to be able to explain to the public the whole plan for water for the country. And I am sure that I am seeing some work being done by WASA, and I'm sure that based on the money that has been approved for that particular project and the contracts that were also approved, I expect that we would be getting some relief in the water, or citizens should be expecting some greater relief in the water system sometime next year. But then we are also fixing a lot of our structure. And as you said with WASA, for example, at a time when we have climate change and when we have other needs that are affecting the infrastructure of the region. I mean, when you look at what is going on now with regard to the heat in Trinidad and Tobago, think about that. The heat in Trinidad and Tobago, what happens when you have heat? When you have 30%, 35% of your water being as a result of surface water. So you have a lot of evaporation happening. Right. So when we talk about climate change, it's not just simply about the heat. You know, climate change affects all of our life. Climate change means that we have to look at the WASA infrastructure, and whilst we are fixing it for fit for purpose in the past, we have to fix it in a manner that it would be resilient to climate change activities going forward.
How successful are we at looking at those kind of gaps in our country in particular? Do you get a sense that we have that sort of assessment going on? Because it seems, well, it is not seems, we are coming from behind the curve in many of these issues. Digitization, we're behind the curve. Water administration after administration behind the curve. Economic diversification behind the curve. So I'm sure there has been some assessment overall, if I'm wrong, you can correct me, in terms of our development strategy gaps Has that sort of assessment been done in the country?
Well, I mean, yes, I think, the truth of the matter is, as a developing country, one of the difference between developed and developing country is that we have scarce resources, right? As a country, there are lots of demands, but there's not enough, and therefore choices need to be made. When you have scarce resources, just like an individual, you can't satisfy all of them. You have to prioritize them, and you have to then spend money in a manner that is in keeping with that priority. It would have been nice if we could have gotten the money and addressed the water situation in Trinidad and Tobago a long time ago. And that is also, that pains me, the water in Trinidad and Tobago. It is a situation that it could be fixed. It should have been fixed. And we are on a path eventually to having it fixed. Because we are putting designated resources.
Oh, did we lose him there?
Talking about
digitization.
Okay.
Oh,
now, in the case of digitization, again, I mean, Trinidad and Tobago was one of the first countries in the region that set up a designated ministry of digitization to put the countries on a holistic path in that regard. Should we be moving faster? Yes, of course, we could always move faster. Do we have, or sometimes, all the resources and all the money that is needed to do everything that we want? In some cases, that's not happening because we have other priorities to see about. But there is always, I agree, room for improvement.
You spoke about scarce resources a while ago, and yes, that's true with developing countries. We are in a place now where, as a country, we have reduced revenue in our main breadbasket, gas and oil, than we had 15 years ago. Do you get a sense that as a country we've acknowledged that? I know the government knows it because they have to deal with the allocation of resources every budget cycle. But do you get a sense that that has been translated successfully to the country, and the kinds of adjustments that we should make and that we know we have to make have been translated? Because I know everything is political at some sense, because depending on what part of the political cycle you're in, we're in an election cycle now. It may be difficult for any sitting government to make the kind of changes and adjustments that need to be made in relation to where we are revenue-wise. Do you think that's been successfully translated where we are? In other words, I don't know if the word is poorer, but we certainly have diminished revenue compared to 15 years ago.
Well, one thing I could agree with you is that, yes, I think we do have diminished. We are operating in an international, an open economy that is our major commodity, our major income is subject to world prices. And therefore, from time to time, that price will move. We are also have, again, it's a scarce resource. That resource has been reducing. And therefore, we have production. So we have a production problem, we have a price problem, resulting in reduced revenue. I have mixed views on whether or not we are communicating it or not. I think if you ask any Trinidadian, do you think that they're needed for adjustments? Do you think that there are better needs for efficiency, and are there needs for us to tighten our belt? I think most Trinidadians will say, yes, I agree, I think so. However, when it comes to...
I don't know who you're asking. If I ask that question to Trinidadians, they will tell you the wealth gap is widening, and some don't have that, and I suffering more. I think that's the response you get.
Well, I think, listen, I think though, so you'll get varied answers, I mean, depending on who you ask, but you're also saying, what you also mentioned is also correct. What I have found is when it comes to asking are you prepared to carry the burden or some of the burden of that adjustment? Well, most people say, listen to me. There are lots of other areas that I think you need to tighten. And when you fix those areas, then come to me. All right. So I'm not sure that there is a full realization that, listen, at the end of the day, this wheel of adjustment needs to start somewhere. And the truth of the matter is, we are indeed a poorer country, and some of the levels of expenditure that we have enjoyed over the years, we need to make some downward adjustments. I totally agree. I mean, our subsidy programs, for example, I think some of our subsidy programs need to be restructured. I am one for ensuring that all who need subsidies, that they are afforded to. I believe that the income levels in the country, the level of the vision of income is also getting wider. And therefore, there are lots of subsidies, indirect subsidies that are given today to the wealthy that we need to reduce.
Well,
and we need to realign our programs so that we are better able to ensure that the people who need help gets help and gets help in even greater numbers, and the people who don't need are reduced. However, how we go about that, I think our tax system, we lose too much money it has been estimated about somewhere between $5 to $10 billion is lost still in Trinidad and Tobago via a tax system that is too porous. And therefore, you have great difficulty in asking someone to take adjustments or to make adjustments when the efficiency of our tax system is not working. So I think we need to get that right.
Yeah. As you raise the issue of subsidy, you would have spent time as a Minister of Public Utilities. Last week, we would have interviewed the head of the Energy Chamber, Dr. Dax Driver, concerning a comment that he had made, that he cleared up, in terms of removing the subsidy for certain levels of people in the for electricity rates. I think he said for people using 2,000 kilowatts and more per cycle. I think he also quoted a figure of about 84,000 residents who would not be a beneficiary of that particular subsidy anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I totally agree with that. Let me say that. I think, for example, let me give you some statistics as I recall. They might have changed now, but on that particular topic, we in Trinidad, there are about 420,000 consumers of electricity, right? About 260 to 300 of that amount, probably about 60% of the people who are using electricity in Trinidad and Tobago, bills are below $300 a month, a quarter, $300. So there are lots of people in Trinidad and Tobago, who get a subsidy and who actually who manage their electricity or do not have the types of equipment that pulls a lot of electricity. So when you look at the amount of money that we get that is given out for electricity in the residential sector, it just means about 10% of the people whose bills are in the capacity of $30,000 and $40,000. They are the ones who could afford, right? And they represent about 70 to 80% of the revenue that comes from electricity in the consumer. And a lot of them could afford, and they don't need a subsidy. So you have close to 260 to 270 people in Trinidad and Tobago whose bills are below $300. Yet still you have people with bills at $30,000 and $40,000 and $45,000. So when you're giving cheap gas to give everyone cheap electricity, you clearly need to manage that distribution. Continue to ensure that some people need cheap electricity, and I am not advocating for those people to have to pay more. But I also believe that the subsidies that is also passed on to everyone, for the individuals who could pay a lot more, the rich people, that they should have to pay. And then we have to take that money and pass it on to other areas in the economy that needs that type of money. I mean, we talk about crime. Crime is on the lips of everyone in Trinidad and Tobago. But when you go to the allocations in some of these secondary schools, these poor challenged secondary schools, you know, there are lots of money needed in those areas. The youth programs, we need to have more. We are doing a lot. Fantastic work being done with MyLAC, MyCap, and all of these programs, agriculture initiatives being done with Foster Cummings. However, we need to put more funding to get those people and those young people employed, right, and support programs like that, especially in some of our challenge areas. So there's a reallocation that is required.
You know, you mentioned a while ago the wealth distribution and the issue of the percentage of persons who are benefiting from these subsidies, and also the tax collection shortcomings, and the population being asked. You said if you ask the average person to tighten their belt, they will say yes, which I disagree with, because they will say, well, the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic bracket have already been bearing the brunt of it, while they're seeing in the newspapers businessmen not paying millions and millions of dollars in taxes and benefiting from the subsidies and getting exorbitant amount of forex to do what they want and ship out to the country. And it's always seemed this disparity of the burden being shifted to the persons in the lower socioeconomic bracket. So when people hear that, they say, how much more you want us to take?
Which is a point connected to the whole conversation that you're having about adjustment and whether the society is aware that the country has less. I don't think there is any Trinidadian or Tobagonian that is not aware that the country has less. The economy has been, stagnant for the last decade. It's almost like a decade lost in terms of any substantial growth. Wages have basically not moved, or they're moving, 2%, 3%, 4%, and there's always a backlog of wages. People are aware of the costs that they have to pay and aware of the problems in the society. So when you're having that discussion about whether the country is aware of the adjustment needs, I think we dumb down the public as if they are not aware. Of course they are aware, because they are feeling it. They are feeling it across all sections. You are feeling it, even the business class.
But I think the point that you make there, and I agree with you, and you are. I think the population, to some extent, understands that we are poorer. When it comes to the level of distribution of that adjustment that is required, I agree. I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done. I think the Revenue Authority is a step in the right direction, right, in us tightening, and I'm glad to see that we are moving forward with it, all right, because countries who have instituted revenues authorities have seen 50, 60, Jamaica, you go to Jamaica, you go to Kenya, you go to countries in South America, everywhere in the world where it has been put in place and properly managed, we have seen substantial increases in our revenue. And I think that's one of the first things that we need to do, because when you are asking people to make adjustments, you have to ensure as a government that you are also doing all that is required to maximize your revenue. And therefore, that Revenue Authority, it's unfortunate that it got stood up in the courts. And God knows, since 2010, we are thinking about putting this Revenue Authority in place. And I can assure you, if you look at all of the international agencies, the IMF, their agency that looks at tax leakages in a country, those reports date way back pre-2010, which motivated Mr. Manning at the time to want to do the Revenue Authority. It was recommended then. So consider a country that over the last 24 years, over the last 14 years at least, what we know, and even before that, have been losing close to $7 to $8 billion in revenue. When you multiply that by our debt, for example, as a country, total debt, you will realize that if we had a revenue authority in place collecting the types of correct taxation, then our debt levels will be down to minimal levels in the country. So that to me is important for you to be able to set the psyche of the country right in
But how
being able
much?
to pass adjustments.
But how much is that psyche affected by public perception of the decisions being made by the political class? And I'm not talking about any party in particular, but the political class generally. And what happens in Parliament, you have a lot of cynicism from citizens about how much money is wasted in terms of the management of our resources. And you could just look at that terrestrial issue with HDC, where millions of dollars are going down the drain, and they have to now rebuild it. You have so many examples of things that have happened historically. So the citizenry can be cynical about, y'all are wasting the money for which we have contributed to the tax net. So don't come to me and tell me more and more, oh, more adjustment, more adjustment. Just shut up. I'm just thinking that's what some citizens are like. They don't want to hear you. They don't want to hear politicians anymore. They see all manner of things going up for, and the state isn't talking about a couple $1 million. It talks about tens of millions of dollars. We're doing this, hundreds of millions of dollars, and people are saying, yeah, and I'm struggling to pay my rent because a simple thing of landlord-tenant law that modernizes the relationship between landlords and tenants, which affects me on the ground, nobody's in Parliament is interested in dealing with it. But you want us now to say, yeah, take adjustments, but you're not talking to my landlord and saying the crap that you're doing, or the landlord saying the crap that my tenant's doing. I'm struggling on the ground, but yeah, take more adjustment. There is a disconnect.
Well, you mentioned the terrestrial issue at the side. I saw it in the paper since I was there. I mean, again, from what I read also, I'm not sure that will result in much cost loss because I'm not sure how much money was actually paid or not paid. So on that particular one, I think the verdict is still out whether or not we'll actually lose the money or whether or not the contractor will be the one that will have to absorb that loss. But I think the point that you made is taken, and I agree with you that one of the areas that both governments, I mean, we talk about, you need the whole idea of tightening up in our execution and our efficiency and people, and that conversation with individuals. I think for sure we have seen where a number of the projects, and a number of the projects done in the past, we have seen a tightening up of that budgetary process, or the cost of those projects have come down significantly than what they used to be. But we are also seeing in the papers some of the schools and some of the wastage that still continues, and that needs to be tightened. And that credibility in being able to get our house in order, revenue collection and other areas, is what is also affecting the communication that we are also having with individuals to be able and passing laws that affect them. So Richard, yes, there are some improvements that could be done in that particular area also.
We've also spoken in this country a while about the productivity issue, the ease of doing business. And we're at the stage now where I think the last information I have, and I could stand corrected, is we are at the stage of negative FDI, if that is correct. And we are struggling to attract the kind of investment, foreign direct investment, to, in some instances, in addition to loan arrangements, finance development projects. Why is that?
You know, the truth of the matter is like I say that analysis is a little bit like West Indies cricket. It's not that West Indies cricket has actually gotten worse, you know. I mean, we could say that the people, but the others have studied us and they are better, and we have not moved to the levels that they have moved to. All right, so they have improved, and when you are looking at foreign direct investment coming into your country, you are also competing with the world. You are competing with all the countries in the world, and you have to ensure that there's a holistic approach to investment. There's taxation, there's tax incentives, there is crime, there are
How much is the
tick
how much is the
boxes.
acrimonious politics of the country impacting that?
And our acrimonious politics of the country in Trinidad and Tobago is driven to a large extent by the other things that we celebrate. We are a cosmopolitan, plural society where every creed and race finds an equal place. And we are all in this together, right? But we don't get, from a political perspective, the polarization and the large groups that we have involved in that polarization, when it allows us to be, it prevents us from being able to unite and be able to make decisions that are always in the best interest of the country. So it is difficult. Trinidad and Tobago, by virtue of our, as I said, it is not an easy place to manage, simply because the things that we celebrate also are the things that also prevents us from getting that type of unity, right, in making the types of decisions. I always celebrate Barbados as a good example that has an excellent relationship between their unions and their governments in a tripartite arrangement. When I was in Barbados, I participated in that, and a lot of conversation and argument happens in one room when that tripartite conversation is happening. However, when one leaves that room, there's a sort of putting country first and unity that goes out there. That is not part of the Trinidad culture.
Well, it's a different culture.
And therefore, it's part of what it is we have to manage in Trinidad. And as one way, we celebrate our diversity, but it is also part of what we have to deal with. And it is part of our politics. We do have a plural society and a polarized plural society.
Well, look, Mr. LeHunte, I know that we may not have the time to take calls, but just to read one of the comments on the chat by DL, who is asking for magic, really. They're asking for magic. Stop corruption, wastage, and kickbacks, and the country will have more than enough money to run like a first world country.
And that's a general sentiment out there.
Yes, still tax accordingly, but make the systems work. Now, how is that to be done?
Well, that's magic. Let me also say, the numbers behind that needs to be put for that, for me to believe that, that is entirely. I'm not entirely sure that if you just stop the corruption altogether, we will have all the money to fulfill all of the needs, because the needs of this country from an infrastructure needs, they are huge. But yes, I agree that that is ideal. That is what needs to happen. But if you want to stop the corruption, you have to look and shake up the society. You have to shake up the police department, white collar crime unit. All right. You have to shake up the judiciary. You have to shake up the government. We have just put the procurement legislation. You have to shake up that. Well, and I know they are working with a fantastic head in Beverly who is working to put the infrastructure in place. So it's the fixing of it doesn't reside simply with the government. It resides with the judiciary. It resides with the police service. And as we saw in our constitutional reform, it is not that easy as a government, having been there, to have government to call a police commissioner and say, listen to me, I need you to improve in white collar crime, all right? Because the service commissions, our governance structures are not there. So there are a number of things. I agree with what you're saying, Wendell, but it's a little bit of utopia to ask for it. We need to put things in place for us to get there.
You have 4 minutes, and I'm going to put you in an untenable position. You are the Minister of Finance, hypothetical, and you're presenting a budget on the 30th of the month. What are your 3 imperatives in that budget, given where we are?
Well, from my perspective, again, I am a Minister of Finance and I'm presenting a budget, and you're taking away the fact that I am not in an election year, right? Because I am not. This is.
No, you are in an election year.
Yeah, this is the last election year.
This is the election year.
Yeah.
This is not an election year.
Well, I think I am glad to see that there's a tightening up of the revenue stream that I think we need to do. All right. So I think we need to look at putting implementing all aspects of the revenue authority. And I think we also need to look critically at some areas as to how are we going to get a little bit more revenue, because our revenues are definitely going to be down. So that is one particular area. I think we need to look at I think we need to look at our efficiency in the money that we spend. I will be, as I said, I will look at trying to ensure that the poor gets even more in some areas, because I think not able to pass money and support some of those areas are what is also driving our crime situation. So I am about ensuring that poor people could even continue to maintain their subsidies and even get more. As I mentioned, and I agree with that, I would look at raising and ensuring that we reduce some of the subsidies to people at the rich. I will want to put some incentives to stimulate energy efficiency and energy conservation, right? I think that that's an industry that could be developed to get jobs in the case of energy efficiency industries. And I think we need to work towards trying to make the country a little bit more energy efficient as part of the whole efficiency, so that we will be able to reduce and maximize better the natural gas that we are also out there looking at getting. Those are off the top some of the immediate things that I feel we need to look at. And I think how we distribute, as I said earlier, how we distribute our subsidy programs and how we allocate our subsidy programs. I don't think any Trinidadian will be upset if we remove some of the subsidies or indirect subsidies that are being paid by or being collected by people who already have too much. The income distribution in Trinidad and Tobago, since returning, I'm seeing that it is widening, and I'm seeing that poor people are under a lot of stress, and they know they need some assistance. I mean, and I was helping one of these schools in the Laventille area, and out of 90, 120 students applied to the school will probably get an intake of about 90, because 30 students just do not have the resources to go to school. That is a recipe for crime, when you look at the infrastructure in some of these schools, right? We recognize that. Could you imagine at this time when you are feeling the heat in your air condition, and I'm talking to some air condition people and they're being called out because the air condition system they're working, but the heat is so intense out there. There are people in this school who go to school in those schools and they don't have fans in their school. So they are in a classroom without fans, minus air conditions.
They can't function effectively.
You can't function effectively. And therefore, we have to spend some money in ensuring some of these programs, some of these kids are in the school, and some of the other programs, we have to expand programs at MILAC and a lot of these youth initiatives, because they are scoring under 30% and they're finding themselves in a system that just moves them from one level to the next. Some of them should not be there. They should be in other places. Because
but that's a whole other conversation. We had to stop.
And you are scoring.
That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, you're right.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. Robert,
so those are some of the areas that we need to focus on in the budget, so that we will be able to address some of the problems. All right. The whole life. So we could go on and we could go on.
Well, budget. I mean, we hope to have you after the budget to have a conversation. So wherever you are, we will send the link. Thank you for being with us.
All right. Okay.
All right.
No problem.